Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Raghuram Raju. I teach philosophy at University of Hyderabad. Today we are going to discuss the overview of the subject philosophy. Most often, one wonders why philosophy. We may not ask this question about many other subjects, but we sometimes come across people asking the question, why philosophy and what does it do? Now, I think it is necessary to answer this question, but answering this question may not be directly answering this question, but answer it by retracing certain important trajectories. One way of making sense of the importance of philosophy is by taking a new institution or an institution to begin with called old age home. Why is there a old age home? Now, the question that we should also be asking is, why is there an institution called family? Why is there an institution called village? Why is there an institution called a city? Why is there an institution called a university? So similarly, when you start asking the question, why is there a old age? Okay. Now, the question can be asked by the following sub-question, namely, who live in a old age? Who live in old age? Old people live in old age. That's a very easy way of answering that question. But why do they live away from an institution called family into which they are born? I wanted to bring this to the attention of the viewers by saying that there is a philosophical justification for establishing an old age, and that philosophical justification can be traced to this passage that appears in the famous book of Rousseau, Social Contract. The most ancient of all societies and the only one that is natural is the family. And even so, the children remain attached to the father only so long as they need him for their preservation. As soon as this need ceases, the natural bond is dissolved. The children, released from the obedience they owed to the father, and the father, released from the care he owed his children, return equally to independence. If they remain united, they continue so no longer naturally but voluntarily, and the family itself is then maintained only by convention. Now, let us analyze this passage very carefully. If you dismantle this passage and pay attention to or excavate the subtext of this passage, you will find the following arguments. One, the father has to take care of the children. After they become adults, they are free. Now, what is important in this passage will be known clearly if you contrast it with the earlier practice. In an earlier practice, parents take care of children when children are young, and children when they grow old and parents become old, they take care of their parents. But what is happening in Rousseau is that there is a half of the earlier practice is retained. What is half of the earlier practice? That father takes care of the children, but children don't take care of the father. Now, if you ask very commercial question, why should father take care of children when they don't take care of him? Why should you ask? I mean, the deal is not settled. Okay, the reason there are twofold reasons. Let me identify the first fold reason that is there in this text. The text is saying that the children have to be taken care, so children are indebted to the father, and then the debt is not cleared. But then in Rousseau, the debt is clear. Can you guess how the debt is cleared? The debt is cleared, the sheet is balanced, because the father is only clearing the debt to his father. In other words, that his father spent money and resources on him, and he is indebted to his father. He will not clear the debt to his father. He will clear the debt by spending money on his children. In other words, what it contributes to is you are not obliged to take care of your old people, because if you keep your parents with you, if they fall sick and they need care, you will not be able to go and participate in the production. You will not be able to go to office, as judiciously, as regularly as you would if they are not there. So in other words, only adulthood should be safeguarded. Anything that is non-adult, non-performative, non-productive should be withdrawn into these isolated homes, whether it is a hospital or a old age home or mental asylum and things like that. So the foundation for this is in fact laid in this cruel statement that institutes the old age home. In this, what is in operation is a circular notion of time is broken and made into half circles in a sequential manner, not in a circular manner. It will be like this, half circles. I have been taken care by my father, and I will not take care of my father, because if I take care of my father and mother, I will be away from production. So I will take care of my children. But you might ask the question, why should you take care of children? Because they are also not producing. You know why? Because you have to take care of your children, because they are the future reserves of production. So the children and adults have to be safeguarded and eliminated from or excluded from the adult, the old people, for the sake of the immediate production by the adult and future production by the children. Okay, so it is this passage that creates this new institution called old age. And what made these new institutions a reality is not a sociological work. It is not compulsion from society, but postulations from philosophy, a philosopher like Rousseau. So if you wanted to make sense of these new institutions, there is a need to read philosophy, not all philosophy, but selective form of philosophy. And if you wanted to read selected aspects of philosophy, you should be trained in philosophy. You can't do a selected reading of philosophy without knowing philosophy. So a general reading of philosophy is important to excavate these new things that are in front of us, and that is the connection that I find between philosophy, reading philosophy, and making sense of the social institutions like old age home. When a postgraduate student registers for MA course in philosophy, the first thing that they will encounter is the textbooks on the subject. They will find out what are the textbooks that are there in the subject, whether it is in Indian philosophy or in the Western philosophy. But what is important to know, particularly for a student of philosophy, is there are preceding stages, preceding the textbooks that are in front of you when you immediately join for philosophy MA. And they are in the reverse order, the following. The one that immediately precedes is the textbook. All textbooks are written from texts. So texts come before the textbooks. Let me elaborate this by introducing a distinction between classical philosophical texts and textbooks. Most of philosophy, both in the West and India, is available in original texts, whether they are Upanishads, Vedas, or Plato's dialogues, Descartes' texts, and what have you. However, for the sake of students, we have come across several textbooks which will help students to begin understanding these classical texts or original philosophical ideas in a more easy way. And they help students in an enormous way. They are easy to follow, and textbook ideas in the textbook can be extended. You can compare one idea with other idea. You can contrast one idea with another idea. So there are very important virtues in a textbook on any topic or several topics. But then there is a problem with the textbooks. Though they make things easier for students to understand different philosophies, they do not have the vibrancy or dynamism that is available in the original texts. So, after one masters the ideas, philosophical ideas in the textbooks, there is a possibility where one can go further and read the original texts, and this reading can in fact become easier than reading them in textbooks. So the texts come before the textbooks, okay, and texts are written by philosophers, but philosopher is not the one who necessarily starts a philosophy or a new philosophy. A philosopher can be the one who assembles the writings of some visionary who has expressed certain new way of looking at things. But these new way of looking at things may not be in a systematic format. Okay. So a philosopher is the one who very carefully, systematically and diligently, logically constructs a system on the basis of these radically different insights, which most often are path breaking. That they are radical because they facilitate a different and a novel way of looking at the same reality differently. So this is the task of a visionary. That's why philosophy is called darshana in Indian philosophy. Darshana is a visual thing, seeing things differently. In Western philosophy, particularly Greek philosophy, philosophy is considered as love of wisdom. Okay, that's a person is wise, and knowledge about philosophy is love of wisdom. So that is more of a characteristic feature, a virtue, which is a state of affair, whereas in India it is more of a visual in nature. But what is common to both Western philosophy and Indian philosophy is that these are all things that a philosopher is the one who builds a new system. The philosopher may not be the author of those ideas, but he is the author of systematizing those ideas. This is what Plato did to Socrates, Badarayana did to Upanishads, Nagarjuna did to Buddhism or Buddha. Okay, so philosophy traditionally has been performing two important roles. This is the one that I just mentioned to you, building a new system on the basis of the novel ideas expressed by a visionary earlier. And second task is more conventional one, namely he would or she would systematically and rigorously evaluate the existing system. So this is an internal aspect of the subject, that what is inside a philosophical system, how do I look at it, how should people look at various components of each segment of that system, what is the relation between metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, logic and other disciplines within a philosophical system. So there are twofold tasks the subject has been performing. Now in this program on philosophy, where you are going to have various courses, 16 courses, the idea is to have both Western philosophy and Indian philosophy put in one place. They will also have both classical philosophies and modern philosophies. Now the division is not going to be rigidly, half-half, but eventually that's the idea. There are 16 courses that we are going to cover in this MA course, and they are Metaphysics 1, Epistemology 1, Logic 1, Ethics 1, Metaphysics 2, Epistemology 2, Logic 2, Ethics 2. Philosophy of science, philosophy of religion, philosophy of language, philosophy of education, philosophy of mind, philosophy of art and aesthetics, social and political philosophy, and philosophy of law. The architecture of these courses is the following: that of the 16 courses, the first 8 courses are the core of the subject. The second 8 courses constitute the balcony of the subject. Now, the important thing about the balcony is a balcony is like the 5 senses of human body. The job of a 5 senses is to look outside and also inside. That balcony is balcony is a part of a core building, yet it facilitates looking at outside. At the same time, it is not the outside. It is the outside looking at the outside. It is similar to the job of a 5 senses of a human body. That 5 senses look out, but they are not supposed to only look out, they are also supposed to look in. So their job is to calibrate both inside and outside. The 8 courses, the second part of 8 courses perform this job of calibrating both the core of philosophy and the outside. Now the third aspect of this architecture is what I would call as the boundary of the subject. That it is important for every subject to know not only what is inside the subject, but also what is there outside the subject. So what are the boundaries? The boundaries in this sense are science, religion, literature, society, politics, art, and there can be some more. For instance, philosophy is not sociology, though one cannot make a rigid distinction between philosophy and sociology, but there is something that it does to sociology which sociologists will not be able to do. I'll give an example. The example is the following: that it is Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, who argued that social theory till Durkheim has tried to explain why people come together to form a society. And he said, like, societies are, along this conventional sense, are formed through the consensus. What brings people together? Whether it is a contract, whether it is utility, whether it is justice, whether it is God or something else. Foucault said that is not the way in which societies are formed. Societies, Foucault maintained, are not formed by coming together, but through the process of exclusion. That by excluding what, a society is formed. And he identified how, for instance, what is excluded in the form of prison, mental asylum, clinic will not be outside the society, they will be inside society, but well quarantined. So they are quarantined, so in that sense they are physically inside but conceptually outside. So he said that societies don't have clear-cut borders. What has clear-cut borders is those that are excluded from society. They have a clear-cut border. So look at this thing. Now, social theory would not be in a position to come up with something like that. It is a philosopher who comes up with a very meta level and radical way of re-looking at the same thing that they were doing entirely differently and radically. So that's what I'm saying, that the philosophy also can look at what is there in the not balcony but at the borders. The fourth dimension is there are certain things philosophy will not do. Philosophy will not do, will not do something about sports. Philosophy will not do something about, lathes and machinery. Now let me just briefly talk about what does metaphysics do. Metaphysics, which has two courses in this list of 16, performs two important jobs. One, it is about knowing what is the nature of reality. It's about knowing what is the nature of objects and things. Okay, now one might ask what is special about it. Now there is quite a lot of rich and varied discussion about what is the nature of reality. For instance, you have a theory, in fact there are different kind of theories in Upanishads, where it is said that from non-being, being came. So for instance, you can see, then there was neither aught nor not, no air nor sky beyond, what covered all, where rested all, in water gulf profound, not death was then, nor deathlessness, nor change or night and day. That one breathed calmly, self-sustained, naught else beyond it lay, gloom hid in gloom existed first, once he eluded the view. In other words, it's saying that there was nothing, there was a non-existence, and then existence came into being. This is one version about it is governed by heterogeneity. It is also governed by asatkaravada, that is, from non-being comes being. This is one explanation about the nature of reality. There is even within Upanishads a variety, where, for instance, in Taittiriya Upanishad, you have a situation where, from being came another being. So it is not from non-being a being came, but from being came another being. So there are different versions of what is the nature of this reality. How did it come? Was it there all the time, or did it come, in between? If it has come in between, is it going to terminate at one point of time or not? In philosophical terminology, metaphysics use this phrase like pre-existence, post-existence, and non-existence. So all these things form part of what is called metaphysics. The second subset of this major core is epistemology. Epistemology is about paths of knowing this reality that we have dealt in metaphysics. In other words, what are the ways of knowing this reality? Is it going to be through perception? Yes, but the problem is, all that we perceive is all that exists, or is there something else that exists which is not perceived by us? Take a simple example, that we see an object in front of us and we perceive that object. But the doubt arises, did this object come into existence when I started perceiving it, or was it there earlier? Obviously, it was there earlier. If it was there earlier, how do I know that it was there earlier is a question that haunted human beings. So there is an object in front of me which I perceive, but now I wanted to know whether that object existed when I was not perceiving it earlier. So how do I know? Now they thought that way of knowing is what is called as inferential way of knowing. That since it existed now, it should have existed earlier because it is just not born in front of me. So there is a very interesting notion and a very complex notion of how does one cognize the absence? How does one cognize the absence? How do I know what is not in front of me? That is, how do I cognize absence? Do I cognize absence or do I infer an absence? Is a very big theme in Indian philosophical school called Nyaya. Similar way, you have an extensive discussion about epistemology, very clearly discussed in Western philosophy, and we have a wonderful a literature available on different ways of knowing in Aristotle, in Plato, in modern theories, and then and it has become very, very technical and very sophisticated in modern philosophy, particularly in the hands of rationalists and subsequently in the hands of empiricists. The rationalists including Descartes, Spinoza and Leibniz, the empiricists including Hume, Locke and Berkeley. And then you have a modern legacy. So epistemology is about knowing different ways of knowing the universe or the reality. The third important component is logic. Now one might ask the question, what is the nature of logic and what are its functions? The job of logic is to lay bare formal structures of knowledge. That knowledge is you start having knowledge about it, but then it also follows a formal structure. The formal laying bare the grammar of our epistemology is something what logic does. So logic formalizes various kinds of things. Logic is the one which lays bare and gets the geometry of our thinking, and various stages of this order. Okay, that's why there is a close relation between logic and order. There is a further close relation between logic and law, because law, particularly judiciary part of law, is about logical way of arguing a case. How does one look at things differently? Okay, it is not about saying that you are wrong, but what is the justification to say that you are wrong? You are right, not just you are right. What is the justification to show that you are right? These are the logical ways of ascertaining truth, and they have to be on formal grounds and they have to be very objective. So this is the very important function of this very important branch of philosophy called logic, both classical and modern. The fourth important branch is ethics. Ethics performs a very important job in this thing. While logic looks at the formal aspect of philosophy, ethics looks at more existential aspect of human existence and their relation to reality, society particularly. Now what does ethics do? Ethics provides conditions in the classical time to enable people to have proper knowledge. Now people are disturbed, people don't have a stable life, then they will not be able to have proper philosophical activity of knowing the universe. So the job of ethics is to arrive at providing conducive conditions for people to have knowledge. Now ethics does not necessarily deal with conforming to an order. It also contests an order. It also critiques an order. So it provides twofold jobs of conforming to reality or contesting reality. There is a rich discussion about ethics both in India and in the West on this count. For instance, there is this theory called deontology. According to deontology, I do an action not because of the result that it produces, but because the action is good in itself. So consequences are not important for me. I perform an act because it is good intrinsically it is good. So this is one of the important themes in Greek philosophy. I do an action because it is intrinsically good. Now, so there are others who would say that no, I do an action because it leads to some good results. Okay, these people are called teleologists. So action is not good in itself, it is good because of the results that it produces. So in other words, if you wanted to know an action is good or not, in deontology, you don't have to go outside the action. Because the outside action, namely consequences, are not very important. What is important is what is there in the action or in the activity. But a consequentialist is the one who would say, a teleologist is the one who would say, no, action, if you wanted to know whether an action is good or not, that you don't have to ask only at the site of action, but at the site of its consequences. If consequences are bad, then the action is bad. If consequences are good, then the action is good. So there is a big discussion that goes on in this between these two schools. Interestingly, if you look at it, there is also a very important discussion that began from Socrates, and then that is, that interests people even today in the West. For instance, Socrates is the one who said that if I know something, I do it. If I know something and I don't do it, that means I don't know it. It's very simple. Aristotle said no, that definition of ethics does not account for learning and education. That learning and education require that I know something, I am not doing it, now I wanted to change in such a way so that I will do it in future. Okay, so he said that there is a very important dimension where I might know something yet not do it. So the discrepancy is formally allowed by Aristotle but formally denied by Socrates. Now you find that this discussion goes on. So this is the broad idea of these four core themes that I have mentioned to you. Lastly, let me mention to you that the main job of this program is to take care of the following thing, that Western philosophy is a very important philosophy, but it has already a rich academic infrastructure, okay, whereas Indian philosophy, there is a lack of academic infrastructure in Indian philosophy. The effort is to try to fill this gap slowly, gradually, so that a new academic bureaucracy is built over a period of time. Now, as a part of this, we have embarked on this this project, where I began by stating the need to take stock of what is already available in Indian philosophy. I came across, for instance, there are more than 30 books written in English on the history of Indian philosophy. So it is a big research, and we must factor that somehow. And having factored it, I think there is a need to enter into creating new knowledge, which is an extension of what we have already approached. So it is not that we are not going to create new knowledge just like that. We are also going to inherit what is already done and then find ourselves as extending that rich contribution from outside. So it is in this context I find that we are going to discuss, for instance, the contribution of K.C. Bhattacharya while discussing Immanuel Kant, the Western philosopher, the contribution of Alam Kundumeri while discussing David Hume. So this is a broad framework of work that we have emphasized, and I look forward for your looking at the course material in various other subjects. Thank you.